What is going on, YouTube-averts? John Stanek from Johnny Radio here, bringing you another Viva La Vinyl classic album review, and it does not get much more classic than this, folks. The Beatles, the Hey Jude album from 1970, and let me just stop and say I rarely do compilation album reviews, but I had to have this in my collection, and pretty much every record that I buy, I do a review of, in case you haven't noticed how I do my channel. But that's actually how this channel started, was I started a vinyl collection, and I thought I'd like to share it with the world, each album that I buy, and then of course went on to top fives and Heart of an Artist interviews and so much more on this channel. But this is really where it all began, and the Beatles. Let's get back on track, folks. Man, how can it get any better than this, folks? Just the song Hey Jude alone, which, think of it, it was released as a single and not put on any album at the time in 1968. That's just unthinkable in today's times. If an artist releases a single, especially if it's as good as Hey Jude, it's going to be on their album. But back in the 60s, especially when bands like the Beatles were making multiple albums a year, they were just churning them out and churning out singles on the side. Like, not just Hey Jude, but Revolution also was not on an album. Of course, you had the other version of Revolution that was on the White Album, but the single version of Revolution was not. You have Paperback Writer. Then you have I Should Have Known Better and Can't Buy Me Love, which actually were not they were singles, but they were on A Hard Day's Night. But I can't remember, they either were not on the UK version or not the US version, which is why they're on here. Stuff was weird in the mid-60s. You had UK versions, US versions that were not the same. Very confusing. Then you have Lady Madonna, another song that was a single that was not on an album. The Beatles were a band. If you count up how many songs that were just either singles or B-sides that were not put on actual albums, they still were better than most bands today, just adding up those singles. It's crazy. Don't Let Me Down is the prime example. That's my personal favorite Beatles song of all time, was not on any Beatles record. Of course, Paul later put it on Let It Be Naked, which, don't get me started on that. To me, I think Let It Be should have been Left Be. And but Don't Let Me Down is just such an awesome song. You know, just John and Paul with those high harmonies, Billy Preston as the fifth Beatle on that track. And I always think of them performing on the roof with that song. Just love it. It's my favorite. It just sums up the Beatles, I think, because it's got their message of love. It's really a love ballad, but in a kind of pseudo rock song, and just great melodies, great bass line by Paul, Ringo doing his thing. It's awesome. So just for Don't Let Me Down and Hey Jude alone, you've got to have this on vinyl. I mean, why not? Then you've got the Ballad of John and Yoko, which is a nice track. Rain, Old Brown Shoe, a George Harrison track that made its way on here. The best thing about this is there's no Ringo songs, which, sorry Ringo, I love you as a drummer, but you're just not my favorite Beatle when it comes to songwriting. Although Octopus's Garden, on that album right there, Abbey Road, it makes the cut. It's the best Ringo track out of all of them. But back to this. It's very interesting that this was released in February of 1970, before the Beatles officially broke up, which was when Paul McCartney gave the news when he released his first debut solo album, McCartney, in the summer of 1970. So it's very interesting. This came out after Abbey Road and before Let It Be. Actually, Let It Be came out after McCartney made that announcement in May of 1970. So technically, this doesn't count as an official Beatles release because it is a compilation album, kind of a greatest hits album of sorts. But it did, I can only imagine going back in time. I was not alive in 1970, but thinking back, it's like Abbey Road came out, which was just the best Beatles record ever. And that was in 1969. And then early 1970, this greatest hits compilation record comes out. And I wonder what people were thinking. Were they thinking like, yes, this is awesome? Or were they also kind of worried like, are the Beatles over? Before the Beatles were over? Because, back then there was no internet. Rumors were not getting out as crazily as they are now. But I can just imagine most people were just like, yes, more Beatles. And then a few months later, no more Beatles, and Let It Be was the final album, which was actually recorded in 1968, which is crazy. So the timeline of that is just fascinating to me. Just all Beatles history, period, fascinates me. But the fact that these guys, again, I can't say this enough. They churned out so many great songs, so many number one singles in their 7 years as an official recording band. Of course, they had a few years before that where they were touring in Germany and Liverpool. But in that short 7 years, so many stellar albums. This, even though it's a compilation album, if I had to give it a grade, I'd probably give it a strong 8 out of 10, just because, again, Don't Let Me Down and Hey Jude are in my top 3 favorite Beatles songs of all time, and they're both on here, and they were not on albums. So you have to have this. Of course, if you had CDs years later, you had the Blue album, the Red album to make up for it. But the Hey Jude album, you got to have it in your collection if you are collecting vinyl, if you're a Beatles fan. These guys were just the coolest. Look at that beard from Lennon, man. That's just like Lennon in his I could care less about the Beatles now phase. And Harrison, of course, late 60s, early 70s at his peak, writing songs like Something, Here Comes the Sun, right before All Things Must Pass come out. So cool. Ringo, he's fun to make fun of, but he was also an incredible drummer and just the glue that held this band together. And then, of course, Paul, who, I had some negative things to say about Let It Be Naked, but just really one of the most amazing songwriters and performers of all time. So there you have it, folks. That's my review of the Hey Jude album. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you own this? Of course you should own this. That's a stupid question. Let me know in the comments below what are your favorite 2 songs off this record. Mine, of course, are Hey Jude and Don't Let Me Down, but really there's not a weak track on here. They're all great, and the Beatles, always great. So thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, Viva la Vinyl. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, all that jazz. Check out some of my other content that you can see on the screen now. Thank you again for supporting Johnny Radio. Take care, and I'll see you soon.